It'd be lovely to know that I'm being heard. Somebody can acknowledge. Okay. Ivan, where are you checking in from? Where are you?
South Korea.
Oh, we met you. Okay. Good to see you. Wow. What time is it in Korea?
Uh, 1:30, 1:30 a.m.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for checking in at 1:30 a.m. from Korea. And we've got Kaisu checking in from the Netherlands. Wow. Okay. So we are covering the globe. Louise is in Maine and Ruth is in Gallup. Yikes. It's lovely. So, what I'm saying is coming in a moment in the United States when there are many, many divisions and many, many tensions. And I thought I would say something about interrelatedness. Um, and it's wonderful to have an opportunity to do this in conversation with a kind of international audience. You know, in the United States, we were born out of rebellion. So one of our key documents is called the Declaration of Independence, standing on one's own 2 feet, separating from the great country of England to be independent and autonomous. And what I have to say, I think, will be relevant for all human beings. When we're fearful and scared, our tendency to see the other as scary and terrifying goes up. And just being aware of everyone who's in this audience, there are issues of migration in the world that are affecting everybody. There are issues of North and South that affect everyone. And there are fears around the other. There are fears that the other thinks differently, behaves differently, and is a threat. And that's understandable. If people speak differently, think differently, and or are actively threatening us, very easy to see them as other. In the United States, there's a great premium on autonomy, standing on one's own 2 feet, lifting oneself up by one's own bootstraps. But it misses a whole other aspect of human experience, and that is relatedness. And we are a spiritual organization, and especially in these tense times when there's so much being made of the other, I thought it would be helpful and useful to talk about interrelatedness and how we in the Buddhist community contemplate relatedness and respect for others. It's so easy to get fearful, and then with fear, the tendencies are to either fight flee or freeze. I mean, that's just human nature. But I think if we can understand some commonality, some human qualities that are shared with others, this can lead to a feeling of relatedness and community. And we do this in a number of ways, but I'm calling to mind a teaching we received way back at this point. It's way back in 1971, 72 with Geshe Rupten, who was a great Gelugpa Tibetan Buddhist master from Tibet. He lived in Dharamsala at the time, literally in a mud hut. The floor was made of dirt. When we went there, I think we were on some kind of jute carpet. It was very, very primitive. But he taught us about interdependence, and I take what he said and share it because I think it's really, really important to contemplate. You know, we all go to the store, whether it's to buy flour or to buy a baked loaf of bread, and we may not think anything of it. But it's very, very important from a Buddhist perspective, actually, to recognize that there was a person who put the bread on the shelf. And there's for sure, we're aware of the person who checks us out from the grocery store. Although, of course, nowadays there are many automatic checkouts. But isn't it appropriate to feel some gratitude for these people making this bread available to us? But we can contemplate a little bit further. There's some truck driver who delivered that bread. Yeah. And then we begin to think about the people who made the truck. The truck may have been made in who knows where, arbitrarily, Detroit. But for sure, the parts that went into that truck, some were made in Korea, China, Vietnam, the Netherlands, Gallup, New Mexico. Some were made in Maine. Some were probably made in South America. We don't know. But that one truck that delivers the bread was dependent on so many people all over the world manufacturing automobile parts. Don't we owe them a debt of gratitude? But who are all of they dependent on? They're all dependent on farmers to provide food for the people who make the automobile parts. So there are all sorts of farmers all over the world who are supporting the people who make the automobile parts, that make the truck, that support the driver to bring the loaf of bread to a local supermarket. And then what about the animals that support the farmers? Now, of course, if we're in Asia, they're still using bullocks and cows and so forth to do some of their farming. But even the insects in the ground, the grasshoppers, the bees, the worms, little amoebas, little bacteria, all the beings that support the growth of food, don't we owe them a debt of gratitude? And something like wheat or corn, they thrive on carbon dioxide. So they're all the beings like ourselves who are breathing out carbon dioxide. who are then supporting the vegetative growth that provides us with food. Don't we appropriately feel some gratitude to all of the beings who are exhaling and creating carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide in turn is supporting vegetation like rice and corn, that in turn feeds farmers. Farmers in turn support the work people who create the automobile parts that support the truck, that allows the trucker to deliver bread to us. We're all exhaling carbon dioxide, whether it's people who we like or people whom we trust or people who are related to us or people who are enemies. Advertently or not, all human beings are exhaling carbon dioxide and supporting vegetation that grows, that supports farmers, farmers that support factory workers that support parts for a truck that ultimately deliver a loaf of bread to us. So in some interesting way, a simple loaf of bread that we buy at our corner store really involves all beings, all imaginable beings, at least on this planet. We are all interrelated and in some deep way deserving of a feeling of gratitude. And so even people who may be shouting us and disagreeing with us, in some way they're supporting us. In some ways they're helping us. And it may be very, very difficult to relate to that or touch into that, but it's certainly an aspiration that is worthy of consideration, that we live in a very finely tuned web of interdependence, and that, we could even take it down to appreciation for the minerals and the every aspect of this planet which supports us. And that therefore we cultivate and carry a sense of gratitude to this planet and to all beings on this planet for supporting us, even when we just have a simple piece of bread. So that was one way of contemplating interdependence that Geshe Rabten taught us, that I like because it is very, very concrete, very immediate, and it actually doesn't require any sort of positions that are outside of our field of direct experience. Now, of course, another aspect of interrelatedness that Geshe Rabten taught us about was very steeped in the Buddhist worldview. And that starts with a recognition that all beings have been related to us in a relationship of benefit. Now, this relies on a belief in rebirth, and not everybody comes to that within our culture. So what can be useful is just not feeling that you need to believe it or not believe it, but can you entertain it? What would it mean to contemplate rebirth, and that beings may be related to one another, may be reborn. Now, part of the vision of rebirth is that it extends back infinitely. There's no beginning. Now, that kind of boggles the mind a little bit. Doesn't leap to mind that something could be beginningless. How could that be? And if any of you have studied philosophy, you'll appreciate that Thomas Aquinas famously, in proving God, said that there could not possibly be an infinite regress of causes. There has to be a first cause, and therefore must be God. Well, interestingly enough, the Buddhists took the other side of that argument and said, guess what? There's an infinite regress of causes. Rebirth has been going on forever. Can we understand that? It leaves all sorts of open questions, but that's the position. And within that, since it's infinite, it means it's a really, really long time. So any one of you sitting in this audience in my past life may have been my mother, or it might have been 100 years ago as a giraffe, or 1,000 years ago as a chimpanzee, or 100,000 years ago as a dinosaur. I don't know. And as a mother to me, you cared for me as a mother does, even if it was just the act of laying an egg or carrying me in your belly. And most mothers, especially mammal mothers, work a lot harder caring for their young. So this is much more steeped in a Buddhist perspective, but if you start playing with it and recognizing that both people who are dear to me, people who are neutral to me, and even my enemies in this life, enemy meaning somebody who wishes me harm, in a past life may have been the closest relationship to me. They may have really, really cared for me. And because of that relationship in the past, don't I have some debt of gratitude to them? Can I contemplate and imagine what a sentient being who was my mother in a past life did for me? They fed me, they clothed me. The Tibetans like to talk about licking the snot off the nose of the child with their tongue. Apparently, something they do in Tibet. We don't do that. But, if we see how mothers are, and especially good mothers, good mother really works hard for their child. And if we can touch into whoever is in front of us, whether it be a friend, a neutral, or a foe, might be a political enemy, somebody who really disagrees with us vehemently, somebody who may be in a position of power that we don't like, and begin to just imagine that this being in a prior life was in a dearest relationship to me, and that because of that, no matter what they look like in this current incarnation, I owe a debt of gratitude to them. It doesn't mean you behave foolishly with respect to somebody who may want to harm you. It doesn't mean you put yourself in harm's way if somebody really wants to do something negative towards you. But even somebody who may wish to be doing you something negative, you can appreciate that in a prior life, they were very, very kind. And at some fundamental level, you wish to repay that kindness. And in the Buddhist context, the way that plays out is the wish to become as liberated and free as one can, so one can ultimately liberate other beings as well. The final thing I wanted to share, which is along the same lines, but it's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, is that within Mahayana Buddhism, and then especially in the Tantric and Dzogchen teachings of Tibet, we have a teaching of Buddha nature, that all beings, whatever they may look like, however they may appear currently, have the capacity to become a Buddha. It may not look like it right now when you look at an ant or a lion or a giraffe or a bird, but that every conscious, sentient being contains the seed of Buddhahood, and that there is rebirth, and that when one can arrive in a human context, one has an opportunity to develop this capacity for Buddhahood. And that within the Nyingma tradition, they take things even a bit of a step further and say, it's not like you've got to do something to develop this Buddha nature. Your Buddha nature is actually fully developed like a jewel. It is just hidden. It's not like a seed that needs to be watered and grown and a lot of work done. The work that is understood in the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism to reveal one's Buddha nature is essentially cleansing and unpacking and making manifest. But essentially, every sentient being is a fully endowed Buddha. Now, that may be a stretch for us to take in. It's certainly something, again, wonderful to imagine, and wonderful to imagine the consequences of that. But one of the consequences is certainly that every sentient being of whatever appearance is deserving of a certain amount of respect, honor, because at core they have this Buddha nature. You wish to support such beings. So even in times of political division or national division or mass immigration or tension between North and South, the other is ultimately a spiritually rich being. You know, nowadays there's a lot of, we use in English at least, this verb othering, making the other into something separate. And people who study mass atrocities understand that one of the reasons that people can perpetrate mass atrocities on others is because they no longer see the other as human. They literally other and dehumanize others and make them into things. And there is quite a lot of this going on nowadays where others are described in very, very terrible language, demeaning language, despising language, and making others into a thing as opposed to a human being. So, one of the deep meanings of Buddha nature teachings is that every human and sentient being has a deep, deep spiritual nature and is worthy of respect. And so these are three different ways of, in current time of divisiveness and a lot of animosity in the air, bringing to mind ways in which we can feel connected to others, even if it's only in our own contemplation, and even if it's for a few moments, it can turn the heat down on an atmosphere that is very, very highly charged. And just to review, one is that we are related to beings in a vast web of interdependence. Something as simple as a loaf of bread is dependent on the people who serve in the supermarket, the people who deliver to the supermarket, the people who create the truck, the farms that support the manufacturers, and then all the beings that support farming and all of the exhaling that we do. Then within the Buddhist context, looking upon all sentient beings as, if one can imagine rebirth, then in past lives, one has been related positively to every other sentient beings, because there's an idea that rebirth is infinite, and if it's infinite, then we've been related to every other being at some point. And in that relationship, they've been kind. And finally, in terms of relatedness and also respect, the idea that every being has a Buddha nature and the capacity to be a fully compassionate, wise being, that this is our heritage, and that while people may appear different, people may act different, and beings may look different, you know, animals certainly look differently than human beings, but that all sentient beings do contain the seed of fully realized being. And because of that, there is certainly every being is worthy of honor and respect. So that's a talk on interrelatedness in a time of great divisiveness. And we'll take a minute or two to be able to transition to our meditation program, which will start in a minute or two. We need to do something with the YouTube video, so forth. So we'll see you at 11 Central Time if you're interested in staying.